Welcome to Momtroversial, the podcast that dives headfirst into the beautiful chaos of motherhood and dishes on the stuff we wish we would have known and nobody tells you. I'm Leah, your scrunchy nurse writing the Hot Mess Express, here to remind you that it's fine, we're fine, everything's fine.
I'm Alyssa, crunchy mom who's all about organic living. I'm organized, opinionated, and your designated wing woman in any parenting bar fight.
And I'm Tori, your ride or die mama 3 who will absolutely hold your baby and your secrets.
And today we are going to go into an episode talking about homeschooling, talking about Alyssa's experience being homeschooled, Tori's experience homeschooling, as well as Alyssa's, and just some of our thoughts and perspectives on it based off of a listener question that we received on our Instagram at Momtroversial Podcast. If you guys have any other questions or things you would like to see talked about, please go follow us at Momtroversial Podcast on Instagram and feel free to send us a DM or comment on any of our reels. And we really take those suggestions to heart. And that's the whole reason why we decided to have this conversation today. So to get into the conversation and get it started, first, we are going to just talk about Alyssa's experience having grown up being homeschooled. And she has just begun doing some homeschool-ish things with her toddler. So Alyssa, why don't you share your thoughts with us?
So when I say I grew up being homeschooled, I'm the oldest of 5, and my mom, is a I don't think certified's the right word, but she is a first grade teacher, or she was. That's what her profession was before um kids. And so I grew up being homeschooled, like, first, more specifically, and then as part of a group with all my siblings. There were a few things that I really loved about it. Being the oldest daughter, like, my mom and I just kind of think similarly, which was good and bad. But in the beginning, it was really good because she gave me so much autonomy in what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do things. Then as we like, she gave me that as a kid of like, well, do you want to start by learning, do we want to do our calendar first thing of the day? Do we want to do math? There's a lot more flexibility when you only have a couple kids, right? And then as I was older in like middle and high school, it was the flexibility of choosing how I was going to set my schedule. I knew what the expectation was. There was definitely structure. I feel like that can be a common worry, I guess, with homeschool. But with my mom, there was structure. We did 5 math lessons a week. We did, history that week, every week. Um, if it was days, our days were very structured, but I got to choose how I accomplished what I needed to accomplish, um, which was really big for me and having like feeling like I was in charge of my schooling. There were also a few times when the curriculum just threw out the most random, boring book you could ever possibly imagine. And it wasn't just well, that's what you have to read because everyone's reading it, you know? It was okay, and she had a ton of knowledge on books, so that helped too, just being a teacher and from her schooling. But she could, a lot of times was like, "Okay, well, let's read this book instead."
Mhm.
Or, we got to go to Paris in the middle of the school year when I was
That's
10.
awesome.
Yeah, when I was 10, we had, friends who, their dad was stationed at the embassy there. And so they were moving and they were like, "Just come." And it's a really cool story because my mom was like, they'd been trying to get us to come the whole couple of years they were there, and my mom was like, "That's a really big expense." They were trying to get me, my sisters, Yvonne and Tessa, and my mom to come. And the just every time, it was a huge expense. My mom, she was a homeschool mom. We were single income, good income. My dad worked for the government. But a trip to Paris is huge. So finally, my mom's friend, who was my friend's mom, she said, "This is your last call. Like, we're moving. The Packers are coming. Come." And my grandma called her, I think that same day, and said, "The Lord is telling me to pay for a trip for you to Paris, along with the 3 girls." And my mom said, "Well, I know where we could go or stay." So, but just like those kinds of opportunities that,
Mhm.
I can't miss a week of school. But you know what? We went to the Louvre. I went and took an art class at the Louvre. I wrote some papers on it. We saw Napoleon's tomb. We saw the Arc de Triomphe. We went up in the Eiffel Tower. Like, all of this like real live actual history instead of just reading it about it in a book. We went and saw it. Um, and so there's just, you can have structure with homeschooling and also have so much flexibility, which is something I really liked. Something my parents did, I was homeschooled all the way through high school, and something my parents did was we did not have the option of transferring to public school until 10th grade. Um, you might be wondering why not ninth grade? Because of all the peer pressure. There was a ton, every single one of us wanted to go to school in ninth grade. There was a ton of peer pressure about it. Because it's high school. Like, everyone's starting high school. It felt like um, it's a good transition. It's an easy transition, Um, but we were not given the option until 10th grade. And in 10th grade, I chose not to go, mostly honestly, because the, the schedule didn't make sense to me. Why am I getting up so early, going to school, sitting around, maybe learning something, maybe not, and then coming home? Like, I watched my friends do hours and hours and hours of homework, and then, like, literally the only reason I wanted to go to public school was for the sports aspect. Um, but luckily where we live, there was a pretty good sports league for homeschoolers, and we were in, like, essentially we were in a private school league. Um, And so that was helpful. I really wanted to swim in college until I hurt my shoulder. And my parents found ways to support that, even though I wasn't swimming like traditionally at the high school, that kind of thing. There's also a lot of states now that allow homeschoolers to compete in sports. Um,
I was gonna say, what
Yeah.
I remember when I was
Florida
growing up in
does.
Florida,
Yeah.
we had kids who would come, like, at the end of the day that were homeschooled specifically for sports practice, and they were allowed to try out. Like, as long as they were zoned for our school, they still were allowed to attend tryouts and be on our sports team where I'm from.
Yeah. Virginia's just communist, so they hate homeschoolers. So, but yeah, anyways, my point in all of that is that I had tons of opportunity as well. Um, we'll get to the socialization aspect because that's just the whole thing. I can't believe that people think public school is actual socialization. Um, but that was kind of my homeschooling experience. My mom used a curriculum called Tapestry of Grace. Uh, it was a Christian-based curriculum. It had like a Bible lesson aspect to it, intertwined with the history of the time. It went through like ancient history, Middle Ages, and like, early 1900s and, well, late 1800s, and then the 1900s essentially. Um, and that was 4 years. So it was a 4-year curriculum that you would just repeat. And it was set up for like lower grammar, so like lower elementary, upper elementary, middle school, and high school. And you did different things based on how you fit into there. And I really decided I wanted to homeschool when a friend who went to Catholic school asked me to read the Bible with her because she didn't understand the Bible. I said, sure. And we were reading out of a gospel, and I skipped over basic facts because everyone knows these basic facts, especially someone who went to a private Catholic school, right? No, she had no idea. And I know public schoolers don't get taught Christian, even though it's a part of history. Like, they don't get taught like Christian history with it. And I got taught all of that when everything was going down in 2020 and like people were like, nobody even knows who Juneteenth is or what Juneteenth is because they don't teach it in public school. What do you mean they don't teach that in public school? I learned that. Like I learned all of history, not select bits that benefited whoever's in charge. And so that was really big to me. I was like, well, my kids are going to get the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So I guess I'm homeschooling now.
So when it comes to homeschooling for you as a parent, because I know that that's something that you're going to do and that you kind of started doing with Bacon, and you went through homeschooling in general for yourself too. I want to know, do you have any fears with homeschooling, or what's the most overwhelming, scary part to you when it comes to thinking about homeschooling?
I married out of my fear of homeschooling, and that was teaching higher level math. So Ryan is a math major. So
That's so funny.
that is no longer a fear. But I will
Okay.
say, like, it is, I think, a pretty normal fear. And it was a fear of mine of like, well, why am I qualified to teach this? Um, and I would say that anyone with maybe not even with a college degree, but I would say definitely anyone with a college degree is qualified to teach elementary school with a curriculum because the curriculum gives you the guidelines, the information, that kind of thing. And maybe, yeah, you're like, okay, wait, how do we do long division again? But then you just sit next to your kid, and as you're explaining it to them, it comes back to you, you know? Like there were so many times that my mom, who was an actual like educated teacher, I was like, I don't know how to do this. And she was like, okay, well, let me read the lesson real quick. Make sure I remember how to do
Yeah.
it. Um, so I think that is big, and math was definitely a big thing for me. Like when I tell you like I don't understand geometry proofs, like I don't understand them. The only reason I passed geometry is because there were other facets of geometry. Like I don't understand it, but Ryan does. And furthermore, once we get into high school and that kind of thing, I will for sure be hiring that stuff out. There's co-ops everywhere. You can do like the university model schooling where uh, usually parents, but sometimes they're hired teachers with the specific degree will come in and teach a specific class. For it's essentially co-op. But university model is a little more structured generally. Like, you know, you come to school a couple days a week and you learn these certain things, and they usually give you a curriculum to finish, like teaching at home, that kind of thing. But yes, I married out of my fear of math. So that's great.
Okay. That's so funny. Travis is also a math guy, so I don't have any concerns when it comes to that. I feel like for me, the biggest thing that is just scary to me is I was not homeschooled. I have no I have what I am learning about homeschooling, and so that doesn't make me just scared, it's just different. So it's just, comparing childhood is gonna be for me versus my kids, they're gonna have a totally different experience than I did because I went to preschool, daycare, public school my whole entire life. So my experience with my kids is gonna be very different. However, I do have to say, who knows, it will probably change at some point in time. But it's funny because Declan will ask for kids to play with him during the day, and I'll have to tell him, so and so is at school and or so and so is at home with their mommy doing school right now and they're unavailable. And Declan would be like, "Why are they at school? Why are they at school?"
What
And
losers.
then he'll say, "I don't want to go to school. I do school at home." Even though we don't actually do school at home right now because he's 3,
He knows.
but he says, "I don't wanna go to school. I do school at home. I stay home with you." Because one time he told me he did wanna go to school, and I said, "That's fine. Mommy can drop you off, and you can go to school, and mommy's gonna leave. Mommy's not staying with you." And he said, "Oh, no, no, no. That's okay. I wanna stay home with you. I just thought it was funny. Tori,
That's
what,
cute.
when you started homeschooling with Hannah, because I know that that's been within the last year endeavor, but you've thought about it. What was one of the biggest scares or fears that you had making that leap of pulling her out of and as she was in Korean school, and then you brought her home? What was one of the biggest fears you had to overcome to do that?
I think with anything in parenting, you're always thinking like, am I doing the right thing? Am I going to screw my kid up? Am I going to, is this going to change the trajectory of their life, of their learning? And, the reason I ended up pulling her out of the Korean school is because she was bored. I mean, there was nothing wrong with the school. Her teachers loved her. She was very, very well socialized there. Um, but she wasn't challenged in any academic way, and, it showed, like, she was getting into some trouble, she was, like, kinda doing some stuff that was not it was kid stuff, but it was new behaviors for her that she just hadn't been doing previously, so, um I kinda started getting the alarm bells, like, I think I should pull her," and that was really scary for me because my son still goes to that school, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what if she's bored at home? What if she doesn't get socialization opportunities as much? And, what if this is the bad decision for her?" And,
Right.
initially, I was going to send her to public school here on Post. I bought all the supplies on the supply list and was planning in my head, gearing up to send her to first grade. And I don't know, I got extremely convicted. I kept seeing all these things about homeschool, and I was just afraid I couldn't do it. That I would, I wouldn't do enough. She wouldn't, like, at the time, she didn't know how to read. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't what if I can't teach her how to read?" That is, like, the most crucial skill that someone can have in life. Like, what if I can't do it? And what if I set her
Right.
up for failure for literally the rest of her life? And so that was probably the biggest, like, fear for me was just that I saying the wrong thing. Because I had talked to somebody and, I've always been interested in homeschool, but it really wasn't just, like, anything life circumstances. When we were in Germany, she went to a forest kindergarten where they went out to literally the forest with that school. Very Waldorfy. It was great. And then when we were in Arizona, we did like some light quote unquote curriculum, but it was just like we did nature stuff and we painted and very non-structured for my 4 and 2-year-old. Um, and then we came here and they went to Korean school. So they've had a very non-traditional school experience thus far. Um, and so I also worried about the aspect of actually sending her to public school because I'm like, she doesn't have she's never been in like a environment like that. And I really didn't think she would thrive in that environment because, I mean, truth be told, public school is meant to kind of squash your individualism and everything that makes you unique and kind of make you all the same. It's like just how it's designed. And, anyone who's met Hannah knows that she's very one of a kind, sparkly, like just big personality. And I really thought that public school would like squash that in her. And I don't know. That's where my conviction came, where I was like, oh my gosh, like she's gonna like get into all these situations like bullying and um comparison, and I don't know. There was aspects for me that I'm like, oh, she'll learn a lot of good skills, like how to, you know, be with other kids, wait in a line, like raise her hand, like those sorts of like little skills that you learn as a child. But I mean, are those real reasons to send her to public school? No. For me, they weren't.
You learn
And
that
that
as a
is
sibling
coming
too.
from true, yes, where I think you learn it slower at home because there's more grace. But, I went to a private school for the first 5 years of school, and then I was public school educated for the rest of my school career. So I don't have any basis for homeschool either. And there's a lot of, I think why a lot of parents don't choose to homeschool is because there's so much exterior, like, scrutiny, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, oh, how are they going to be socialized question, which is like the dumbest question I've ever heard. Um, but people don't feel qualified. And because we're so indoctrinated by public school, and most of us are public school educated, it's like, I do this. It's kind of like the discipline, the parenting styles we were talking about last week. It's like, if you were raised a certain way, like you have a tendency to raise us that same way. And, you're public school educated, you're going to send your kids to public school, or maybe you send them to a charter, maybe you send them to private, but like you send them to school. That's just like the way of things. And so I think breaking out of the social norms is something that a lot of people are not comfortable with, which is why they choose not to do it.
Yeah, and I think we haven't done it yet, but for me, because of having done public school and why, as of right now, Lord willing, as long as financially I can still stay home with the kids, we are gonna do homeschooling. So I was raised by educators, and my sister, my mom, and my dad still work in the school system and do different roles. And I get to see and hear a lot of the hard that they deal with these days in school. And I never really questioned it, honestly, until we started having kids and then started doing research when it came to being a parent, which is something I've talked about a lot on this podcast of how parenting is one of the hardest jobs that people go into untrained and uneducated. And I'm a big advocate of I love all of my parenting books and I love all of my resources that tell me and give me the answers to things I don't innately know. And I started doing research into it and became really convicted about one. I do believe as a Christian that we're supposed to raise our kids to go out into the world and be a light. But I also believe in protecting their innocence until they are developmentally ready to go out into the world and be the light without being robbed of that innocence when I could have done something to protect them. And all of this came out back when we had Declan, which was 2022. And we were hearing about all of the stuff, the things that are in public school libraries for elementary schoolers that I cannot comb through until books would come home, or things that teachers were getting in trouble for having conversations without parental consent with kids. And I know that that's a small percentage in the grand scheme of things, but to us, that was when my thoughts really started, because that, to me, that wasn't fair. And I'm big on fairness. And then on the other hand, I do feel very convicted that we are robbing kids of their childhood these days, because as soon as we can, we send them to school. They're in school for 8 hours a day. It is super structured. They get a 30-minute recess to play. And then they come home and they are either doing a ton of homework or being thrown into organized sports or organized functions. And there is no time for free play. And kids learn the best realistically through free play until they're about 7 years old. And then developmentally, they can do some more of that structure, but we're not giving them that. And then we wonder why kids are so high strung and emotional and tired, is because they're doing the same schedule as an adult, yet they are developmentally. I mean, I get freaking tired from going all day, and I'm not growing the same way that they still are. So
Yeah.
that is why the freedom of doing it at our own pace and giving my kids freedom, and then also protecting their innocence. And then we'll have those conversations as they get older, kind of like your parents did with you, Alyssa. is the reason why we've made that decision together. Do you have anything that you want to add to that, Alyssa?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying about like how your parents are educators, and I'm sure there's people that might be listening to us that are like related to educators, that kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that public school is the best choice for any child, period. I don't. But I do think that
Right.
there's a ton of fantastic educators in public school.
Right.
Unfortunately, you just don't get to pick and choose. And essentially, what you're doing by sending your kid to public school and even private school is you are allowing someone else to raise your kids because you have
Right.
them for, or they have them for their most awake hours and most formative years. So, and that's not meant to like shame anyone or like put guilt on anyone, but
Right.
it doesn't change the fact that it's the truth, you know?
Right.
So, like, you
Yeah.
kind of have to adjust your mindset to either accept that or say, wait, that's not actually what I want. I want to raise my kids,
Right.
you know? The amount of, oh, I don't think that I could ever be with my kids all day long. First of all, people say that in front of their kids. That is awful. Can you imagine
Yeah.
if like your husband was like, oh, I could never be with her all day long? What? I would like go cry. And not
Bro,
just
you
because
said
I'm
till death
pregnant.
do we part, baby.
Huh?
I said, bro, you said till death do we part, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, can you imagine a kid who doesn't have a full understanding of the world, whose brain is still developing, hearing their parents say that about them? You
Yeah.
know, whether that's the way you feel or not, like the fact that people say that and then say that in front of their kids is just depressing to me.
Yeah.
Um, but it just I just think that that's the mindset shift that needs to happen. Are you going to raise your kids or are you going to let somebody else raise your kids? Because you don't get a choice in who raises your kids. You know, you don't, if you
Mhm.
send them to public school, if you're letting, or private school or anything, and you're letting daycare and you're letting someone else do that job, that is what you're doing. Someone else is doing that job. And yes, it can be financially difficult to stay home. We don't go to Disney every 6 months. And that is a choice that we have made. You know, we don't go on a cruise once a year. We don't do all the things that maybe some dual income uh, families can do. But I
Right.
would also say that I don't miss it. You know, would I like to go on a vacation with my husband? Yeah, that would be nice. But the big reason that I don't do that isn't because of money. It's because we live a bajillion miles away from our family. And that's pretty much the
Right.
only people who I trust to be with my kids for any
Mhm.
significant period of time, like over days and days.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was a little bit of a tangent. But the whole point is
It's
who's
okay.
raising
It's
your
a
kids,
tangent.
because that's the that's the decision that you're
Yeah.
making there, whether it's a decision you want to make or not. It doesn't feel good to say, yes, I'd like to have someone raise my kids. Like no one's saying like, oh, you should be totally fine with that. In fact, I'm kind of saying the
Right.
opposite. You shouldn't be totally fine with that.
Right.
But I just I just feel very strongly about that as someone whose mom did raise me and who is perfectly socialized. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's funny. I really wholeheartedly agree with everything you guys said. I think one thing I wanted to touch on is the something you said about how much play kids need and how they only get 30 minutes of recess at public school. Like, even if that's 45 minutes, even if that's an hour, it's not enough. And it blows me away that all of these teachers who are trained in early childhood development or, middle adolescent development, but especially early childhood, that they're going into these institutions like schools, public schools, private schools, whatever, with all this knowledge of child development, but they're not saying like, hey, this is not designed for children and for optimal childhood development. And that one, I'm not going to say 100%, but less than just shy of 100% are not doing anything about it. They're not saying like, hey, we need to change the system. And I know there are schools that exist. There are niche Montessori, there are niche Waldorf schools, there are niche like little program schools that are outside of the normal footprint that you have to like pay a lot of money for, that will teach an ulterior curriculum that do take into account childhood development. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but in general, when you're picking a private school, a public school, a charter school, they are not set up to properly develop your child's brain. I mean, when we're starting to force teaching academics at 4 or 5, even sometimes 6 years old, like that's not what their brains are meant to do. There's a reason Waldorf exists, why they don't start academic school until 7 years old. And even then, it's like a very light entry and it's like reading. And when you look at studies of kids who are, public school educated versus different styles of learning, like the Waldorf kids are the most successful. They're the most like, they're the best adults essentially. And so I don't understand why teachers who are college educated and are childhood development educated, how they're not sitting there trying to change the system, because the system is set up to create essentially factory workers. It's not set up to like garner your child's development. Which if anyone's listening to this, you're like, wow, you're a wacko. Like, go read about it. Like, I invite you
It's not
to
wacko.
do a deep dive, on Rockefeller and the creation of modern school.
Prove me wrong.
Sorry for that rabbit hole. Yeah, please. I'd love to have a conversation. But the other thing that I thought was interesting to talk about was like the whole raising your kids scenario, and that thing that you said, like, I could never be with my kids for that long. And like, I never really, I've always like really cringed when I hear people say that, but I never thought about how heartbreaking it is for the children to listen to that. And, I would venture to say that most parents who say that probably aren't thinking about the impact that it has on their little listeners' ears. And I don't know. So I guess PSA, like, if that's how you feel, keep it to yourself. Like, like
or don't have
I would
kids.
say, like,
what the heck?
Most people, I don't know. I think I used to think like when my kids were really, really small, because I was still indoctrinated by the system at this point, I was like, once they go to school, I'll go back to work, blah, 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 blah. It was like this whole thing. And then I like my eyes started opening and I'm like, why would I want to leave them? Why would I want to do that? And I also wanted to touch on something that you briefly touched on, which is the financial aspect. I know a lot of people are, because the economy that we live in is insane. And like, so a lot of people are sitting here like, oh, wow, you're privileged to be able to be home with your children. But I think it does sometimes, not all the time, you're a single mom and you have to work to support your family. Maybe homeschool is not, I think, it doesn't work for every family. But, if you are in a position where you're married and it's important to you, like, I think it can be done. Like Alyssa said, like maybe you're not going to Disney twice a year, taking an annual cruise or, buying all the latest Nikes. Maybe you start shopping thrift stores. Maybe you cut back on eating out, like, and maybe that's how you make ends meet in order to do this for your child. I don't know. I think it has to be willing though. And I'm sorry for anyone who feels judged, but where there's a will, there's a way. There's a reason that statement exists. So if you really want it, you'll make it happen.
And I want to be very clear. I really don't feel like we're missing out on anything. And I didn't feel like I was missing out on things as a kid. Part of that was because I intellectually understood that we lived in, now it was a house that my grandparents sold to my parents for a good deal, but we lived in a 3,000 square foot house right outside of DC. I was well aware that we were not poor. Like, even 20 years ago, that is not poor. You know, we didn't fly places. We drove, you know, little things like that. There were 5 kids. That's a lot of plane tickets. Even now with like paying for 2 plane tickets, I'm like, but like we were not poor. We were not missing out on things. We were arguably a lot healthier because we didn't eat out all the time. Um,
Let's
so yeah.
jump in because of time and talk about some of the different homeschooling styles and the different curriculum options. And then would love to know your guys' thoughts on these and how you guys go about choosing what you guys want to do for your kids. So, for people who are listening, when it comes to homeschooling, there is not a one way to do it. There are so many different options. Here is just a brief overview of what some of the different homeschooling options are. So you have the quote school at home, which is what a lot of people think about when they think about homeschooling. It's the one where basically you buy a full curriculum and then do your schooling at the kitchen table with your kids to get the lessons done each day. So it's very, very structured. And if you're a mom who was not homeschooled as well, if you were a mom who is public schooled, this is a lot of times just like a knee-jerk curriculum choice or style because it's what you know. Because you're recreating school, but at home. Then this is a newer method, which it is the unschooling method where there's like no curriculum, no lessons, no grades. It's kids just learning through life. So if your child is obsessed with dinosaurs, then you lean all the way into that with teaching them about dinosaurs by books, museums, experiments, instead of doing long division at 9 a.m. So that's like 100% child-led. Then you have the classical homeschooling, which is, personally, I don't know how it's different, but this was just one of the ways I saw online. It's structured and it uses, quote, trivium stages. So grammar, which is memorizing facts when they're little, logic, which is critical thinking, and rhetoric, which is debating and writing when they're older. It's heavy on history, books, Latin, and memory work. So it's similar where it's still at kitchen table style, but kind of like history meets the modern kitchen table, academic and intentional. Then you have Charlotte Mason, which is gentle but rich in short lessons, living books, so real stories instead of textbooks, nature study, copywork, habit training. The moms will read out loud and then the kids will narrate back what they've heard. It's big on beauty, wonder, forming character, more than just filling heads with facts. And you have the Waldorf method, which Tori briefly mentioned, which the Waldorf method is a holistic arts-based approach to homeschooling where you focus on the head, heart, and hands. And that's how you learn, is through the head, the heart, and the hands with rhythms, nature, and imagination. So Waldorf is lower tech and it's more experience-based with stories, painting, and movement rather than just the textbooks. Then you have the last two that people may hear, which I know is more popular among younger kids, is you have the Montessori, which is, think about like the wooden materials in the calm environment where the child will choose activities from a prepared shelf and they will work on set activities at their own pace and the parent will help guide them. But the kid is the one who is making those choices for themselves. And it's mixed with math and language materials. So the kid is choosing basically what they want to learn based on the options provided. And then the last one is the Reggio, inspired homeschooling. And so this was one that the viewer who sent us a comment specifically asked about. So Reggio treats the environment as the third teacher. There's not necessarily a set curriculum. You follow the child's interests and turn them into the long-term projects. So you document with photos and notes, open-ended art, nature, outdoors. It's artistic and emergent and child-centered. A difference between like Reggio and Waldorf, for example, is both are based off of, child's interest. Reggio seems to be a little bit more child driven based off of what they're interested in specifically. So like if they're interested in dinosaurs again, going outside and using the dinosaurs as how we're going to come up with the curriculum. And the parent is a co-learner versus in Waldorf, the parent is a guide. So the parent helps guide the child through it. And then Waldorf can be done anywhere, but it says that Waldorf is primarily like a cozy home feel versus Reggio is an outdoor feel. So all of your schooling for the most part is being done outdoor, weather willing. So I would love to know, one, if there's anything you guys want to add to that based off of what you know. And two, how you guys personally feel about choosing a style and a curriculum when it comes to homeschooling for your kids.
My mom did Charlotte Mason with maybe a dash of classical. That's what she did. I feel like I'm trending similarly. I think just like we were talking about with discipline, like kids need structure. So I don't think that the completely unstructured schools are actually that beneficial. I think about like how, some kids actually do like math and science, and so to kind of discount those might do them a disservice when you are getting to like high school and college. So I like to have some structure. I will have a curriculum. Even now with Reagan, we're doing the Playing Preschool curriculum by Busy Toddler. And what that consists of is, a song, a poem that she gives us, a morning calendar routine, reading a story. It's lots of like recall, retell, exploring, and then a little activity. So and sometimes I completely switch up the activity based on how prepared I am, honestly, or how much gardening needs to be done. But I think that structure is important. I know for me, I think the like usual way of math is algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2. I did algebra 1, then algebra 2, then geometry for no other reason than I asked my mom if I could continue with algebra because it didn't make sense to me to take a break and then go back to it, forgetting what I had learned. I took advanced chemistry in high school instead of taking anatomy, which I actually regret because there's some things about like just general anatomy that I just don't know, and that's stupid. But I hated biology, so I wanted nothing to do with biology after that, and I really enjoyed chemistry. I liked it. But again, that was a choice that she allowed me to make, and it didn't, harm me. I just wish I knew more about my anatomy and physiology sometimes. And I'll honestly would probably let my kids make the same decision if they wanted to, but I would just let them know what my experience was. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of structure with flexibility. Yes, we're going to get our lessons done for the day, but if that needs to be in 20-minute increments and you need to go outside and jump on the trampoline, run around, we need to take a break for sports as they get older, that kind of thing, that's fine with me. If, we did we had a creek in our backyard, tons of nature walks. We would get leaf rubbings. We learned all the different types of trees through doing leaf rubbings. we learned about animal poop and like that kind of thing, like just random stuff. So I think you can kind of, if you're willing to be flexible with your curriculum, I think, in my opinion, that's the way to go. Because all of these things, there's aspects of all of these ways to do it that are really important, I think. But without structure, I think, especially for a more academically minded kid, like Tori was saying, like they might not feel challenged, and that could lead to other issues. And you do want to set them up for success in the future because, you know, you don't know what they want to do.
Yeah. I think that that's good. I am a person who thrives on structure, so I need to have some type of a routine in general. But I also, as much as I thrive on structure, I don't like strict routines either. Like I don't like having to routinely be out of the house at this point or routinely be committed to going to this place. I always tell people that I don't make plans for the weekend until like Friday or Thursday night because I don't like committing because I don't know how I'm going to feel. But I like to have a routine and a flow. For example, with my kids, we get up, they eat breakfast, and then it's after they eat breakfast that mom will clean, they will play, we get dressed, I will do some chores, and then we will like move on to whatever our morning activity is going to be. You know, come home, we clean up, toys, we eat lunch, they take a nap. And so I like having those loose flows, but not the strict schedule. So I don't think I could do a complete, like, no structure style, but I also don't want to do the traditional homeschool style either because I feel like that's a place where a lot of moms fail when they try to do just strictly traditional homeschooling at home because your home has been a safe place for your child. Unless you started with strict routines with your kids from the jump, your home has been their safe place to relax and to unwind and to be free. That then when you try to take the strict schedule of homeschooling and throw it into the kitchen table, which is not their routine, sometimes they'll struggle focusing because that's just not the way their brain's trained. Versus if I were to do a traditional method, we would be leaving the house. Like we would go somewhere else, and that's where we do our traditional school. So that way we can still protect the space or make a select space that's not the kitchen table for homeschooling to help the kids. Because I just feel like a lot of times we bring our kids home to give them more flexibility. And a lot of times with traditional homeschooling that I've seen from people, they don't have that flexibility. And then they get frustrated that their kids don't want to sit down and learn. So I think I would want to blend between like the scheduled routine, but then also child focused that they're interested in because it's easier for them to keep attention. If we're learning words, we're interested in dinosaurs. So we're going to use dinosaur books for our sight words, things like that. Or math.
Yeah.
We like baking. Like I had one time when Hannah came over and I had fun with her where we were doing math stuff with baking. And we were doing some adding and some subtracting. And we were going through that with flour. And so we were counting, so doing things like that, but towards like you have your scheduled time and routine. That's kind of where I feel like I will fall with our kids whenever we
Yeah.
get there.
I like that too. And I think that's like where, like you said, like a lot of people have a hard time is like they're trying to bring public school
Yeah.
home instead of creating school in their home and letting their home be school, or letting the world be
Yes.
school. I do think it's important to have a structure as well. And so I've had Hannah home for, let's see, 10 months now. The first like 2 to 3 months she was home, we were very unstructured. We just kind of did whatever we wanted. Sometimes we do a little school stuff, but mostly it was her. Like she loves to write and she loves to like make things. And so that was pretty much what she did. She just was like, how do you spell menu? And then we'd play restaurant. She'd write up a menu and we played restaurant. And
Right.
so that was like the first 3 months she was home. And then finally I was like, oh, I really need to get like the curriculum. So we use a few different things. But one of the things we use, which is very common among especially Christian homeschoolers, is the Good and the Beautiful curriculum. It's Charlotte Mason inspired, I would say, but it's kind of a mix of um, different styles, but they're short lessons. We use it for language arts and math. Um, and it's very like colorful. There's like different like art study or a little bit of geography peppered in, and like some poetry, some, it's like a little bit. Um, but she was reading within a week of starting that. And she does really well with those. It is book work. So technically, we have to be somewhere that she can write or whatever. But a lot of, half the time we do it at the coffee table. She like pulls it around. We do it like a little desk and we like play school. We do it that and her math. And recently I just started a a nature study curriculum from Treehouse Schoolhouse. It's like a Charlotte Mason Waldorf combo curriculum. And it's so cool. It is, and I've said this before, but it's what homeschool dreams are made of. For me, when I first started researching homeschool methods, and Waldorf to me was like, wow, whimsical and fun. Just like, I was like, oh, it feels like really hard to implement all the way. And then you look at Charlotte Mason, and Charlotte Mason was an educator in the 1800s, and she was so big on reading and reading to like read alouds and
Yes.
narrating what you've learned, because then children can will actively listen, so they know because they know they're going to have to like say what they heard essentially. And that's a big part of this nature school curriculum. We right now I've paused the nature curriculum for a couple of weeks because we're doing an Easter curriculum called Unexpected Easter, and it's structured in the same way. So there's the nature study does not have a Bible verse attached, but the Expectant Easter does. So we have a weekly Bible verse, we have a weekly art study, so a famous piece of art, a weekly poem, and then there's like a daily activity, and we read the Bible every day. There's like a little egg hunt they go on, and then they find the egg, and then we read the story, and then we do something like a craft. We read a book. Like there's like all these aspects to it. The nature study is very similar in that there's we just did rainbows a couple of weeks ago. So you learn a hand rhyme, which is really cute. It's like, actually, the seed one is like a little seed for me to sow, a little earth to make it grow. And like you do like these little hand motions with it. And then there's a song, there's a poem, it's like a piece of art that you study. You study like who the artist is, what kind of art it is. You ask questions and like really gets their brain like thinking about it. Um, and then there's copy work. Copy work is a big part of the writing aspect. And Hannah loves copy work. It's funny, she doesn't typically like to write, but when it's quote unquote copy work, she loves copy work. um, and so you basically will just copy the poem. And there's like these whimsy like folk songs, and like I don't know, it's so fun. And I love being able to bring that, because it's so much of it is like go outside and find some nature things, and then create like a sun catcher with all of your findings. um Make for the Easter study, we made palm leaves, and we reenact like the Bible story of Jesus coming in on the donkey and everyone fanning him with the palm leaves. Like, so it's very interactive, and you can do as little or as much as you want. And I'm still finding my groove with homeschool. It's not even been a full year, and I feel like my daughter is in a very crucial part of learning right now with the reading. We're taking it day by day. I mean, we consider going to the market school. because I will hand her money and I'll say, hey, go buy me some carrots. And she has to look and see how much the carrots are, pay the correct amount, and make sure she gets the right change. And that in itself is school. That is like the most hands-on learning. I let her help me check out at the commissary, like scanning the stuff. I try to incorporate her into daily life stuff. And sometimes, sometimes it's hard and I'm just like, just be here while I do something. But, the more you can incorporate your child into life and teaching them life skills, I think the more you're going to see success in your homeschool and in your child's in their learning.
That's so big because, like, does public school teach you anything actually useful in the real world? Like, it's a real question. I don't know. Like,
I
I
mean,
learned how to
yeah,
write
I
a
would say,
check when I was in, like, 2nd grade, maybe
I mean,
5th.
me too, but that's because my dad was like big on that kind of stuff. But, I think we learned how to write and mail letters in school. We learned about
We did learn how to
money,
do that.
but so it's not completely useless.
Did you
But
learn about money,
you
like
know,
budgeting and stuff?
oh no, like we learned
No.
about what money
Mm-mm.
was. Like like this is a dime, this is a nickel, this is a quarter.
Oh,
Learn
yeah.
how to tell
That's
time. I mean, that's
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and I'd say the early ones were the most informative. You learn your days of the week, your months of the year, what money is, how to use it, like the
so
time, that kind of stuff.
for, like, high school, like, did you learn anything about being an adult? Because after high school, you have to be an adult.
Now,
Not
I feel
really.
like most of the lessons learned older on is were personally for me like socialization lessons.
Mm,
However, that being said, I do agree with you that I don't always think the socialization stuff or the social lessons learned were good. Like, I do think it's important, right, to learn how to be around people you don't want to be around. Because as
yeah.
an adult, you can't always just not interact with somebody because you don't like them. And that's one thing that I do think public school does a good job about. It's like if you don't like somebody in your class, you still have to
Too
go.
bad.
But
No, yeah.
yeah, but like
Yeah.
also there's co-ops, right? And you're not gonna, and for homeschool, you're not gonna click with everyone in the co-op, right? And that's another form of socialization and whatnot. So you can learn how to handle that there. I think with homeschooling, the parents get to have more hands-on in the moments of those lessons. Like we were talking about with Tori the other day, some lessons that Hannah has been having to learn with somebody in her group. And I think that because you get to have more hands-on, personally, I think it may be a little bit healthier of socialization lessons when it's homeschooled rather than at school. Because you think about it, your kid's going to experience these things, and then it's not until that evening that they come home and they have the safety of their parents to confide in,
Okay.
to have these conversations about. Versus for the most part, if you go to homeschool co-op, it's like what, an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe. And then you could talk about it if something happened. And then otherwise, mom's relatively around or dad, whoever's doing it all the time to have that conversation. And I think to me, that's the only thing I feel like you learn more at public school, but I don't always think it's in the healthiest way because there is that
Mhm.
gap and you don't have that security blanket, that safe person to go to right when you need them. You have to make an awkward phone call from the principal's office or whipping out your cell phone, or
It's
whatever
never
to really
been
get you.
me. I'm just kidding.
Like it's just, I don't think it's as safe. You don't have as much of that safety when it comes to learning those lessons and processing them with somebody. Yeah,
You have to
That's
figure it
super
out on your
true.
own versus
yeah.
with someone with actual
Well, and that's
experience.
I think that's why, coming back to again like the parenting and the relationships with your kids, like I think that's a big reason why um parents don't have as much connection with their kids because they're not spending all day with them. They're not, they've released them out to be raised by somebody else and then they want autonomy and full control. And I see these parents in like the school board meetings and like battling for different reasons and whatnot. And I applaud that and I commend that. But also, like, if you're having that big of a problem, why is your kid still there? Like, and, I know extenuating circumstances, but outside of that, like, if your child is being bullied, harassed, like, they're being introduced to inappropriate material at an inappropriate time, like, my kid would be ripped out of there so freaking fast. Like, I don't know. I've never understood that. But something I wanted to touch on that you mentioned sort of indirectly is the amount of time that it takes to homeschool. Like,
As in not.
and right. Like, as a public schooler, we're at school for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, with a whole load of homework when we're done. And at homeschool, we do like an hour, hour and a half a day. And that's for language arts, math, and nature. And usually there's some other stuff that Hannah's wanted to pepper in there. She's wanted to read this book, she wants to play this game, and we're bouncing around and doing a bunch of stuff. So like hour and a half, 2 hours, absolutely maximum. I mean, that's if we had to just spread it out. We had a lot of issues. My toddlers, trying to get in the mix 20,000 times, you know, but 2 hours. So that's 6 hours that she gets to just play. We get to go places, we get to do stuff. In fact, she's like, "Mom, I do not want to be homeschooled or public schooled." Like, and um when she, like, talks to people who are public schools, she's like, "Oh, okay." Like, she sees, like, the benefit of it, I guess. Um, and yeah, I think it is so underrated. Homeschool is so underrated. 2 hours a day, your kid gets to play, you get to control the narrative and introduce topics at an age-appropriate time. You don't have to worry about indoctrination, bullying, like, all these other things. I think that's really important.
Well, I want to hit on the socialization aspect a little bit too, because of just what you were saying. Like, it is important. I agree to learn how to deal with people you don't like and that kind of thing. Um,
Mhm.
but I would argue homeschoolers learn more about that than public schoolers because of two things. One, who likes to be around like a middle schooler or high schooler? Like, really? Like, even I didn't really want to be around most of them when I was that age. But I had jobs, little jobs, not jobs that were killing me, that were taking away from anything in my life, but I was a mother's helper from when I was like 8 years old. And that taught me how to deal with parents in the, mother's helper, the parent is at home. The parent is supervising. So that taught me how to deal with parents. It taught me how to deal with kids that are being parented differently than I was used to, or, that I had to follow the rules for the parents, that kind of thing. And I babysat and I had to deal with, generally the kids get a little older as you do this. I had to deal with kids that are a little older and figuring out how to deal with that. I still dealt with tons of kids my age. Just our neighborhood happened to have a ton of kids. I think there were like 24 kids on our street at one point.
My
And a lot of
gosh.
them, yeah, a lot of them were my age. I still dealt with kids my age. Then at 16, I got a job and I was able to make some money without, again, hampering my schooling because um because I had the time, because I could. So now I'm learning about money. Out of that job, my dad taught me how to invest in the stock market and that kind of thing. Made a ton of money on Chipotle. He didn't believe me that Chipotle was going to be big. I was right. Just saying. Um, and Lululemon. Uh, and then as a junior in high school, I went to the community college for my last 2 years of school. And until I was going to the community college, I had a 4-day school week. Maybe like I did like 5 lessons of math a week, but usually I would do 2 lessons one day. And I had a 4-day school week, which opened my life up. Um, we So then I had I transitioned into a little bit more structured schooling, but because I was already in charge of my schooling and in charge of making sure that I got stuff done with my mom's supervision, the transition to college was nothing. It was so easy. And I took, basic courses at the community college, and I learned how to interact with people slightly older than me. And essentially they became my peers, because when you're 16 at a college, like, you don't actually tell anyone that you're 16 because that'd be crazy. But my point is, I think I learned I had a much more varied socialization education than a public schooler would have. So that's just a thought.
I think that's a good thought to end on, and we're going to transition into our favorite moment every single week. The moments that make us laugh, the moments that make us cry, and the moments that make us just say, yep, that's mom life, our Momtroversial moment. I'm going to kickstart us this week because my Momtroversial moment happened 2 days ago. And it's part kid related, mostly me related. We went to Japan and been trying to re-regulate ourselves since being back, and I feel like we're finally getting into a groove. But I had a moment on Tuesday morning where it was the tears per minute, the yelling per minute, the cries per minute was just like we woke up, and as soon as we woke up, that's
Ugh.
what it
Oof.
was. One of those that my moment is that I actually put myself in timeout with both of my kids. I was just couldn't handle it. And one thing that I'm trying, which I don't know if I do a great job at it, but I'm trying to do better for myself, but then to teach the kids, is how to regulate your emotions and know when you're overwhelmed and that you just need to take time out and sit down, and that's okay. And so I had that moment where Declan had just been crying and throwing a fit for like the 1000th time. And I said, you know what? Mommy is feeling really overwhelmed right now, and I need a timeout. So I'm going to need you to go in the living room and play with your toys so I can take time out. And it's funny because I don't do it often. And so when I do it, he's like, Mommy, are you okay? Mommy, you're okay.
Oh.
And I'm like, I love you so much, but I need you to not talk to me right now. Mommy's too overstimulated. And he said, okay, mommy. And so he walked out and he was with Ella in the living room, and I shut the door. And Ella started screaming at the door. And you can hear Declan say, Ella, mommy need time out. Let's go play. Like, leave her alone. And it was just cute. And it was just a learning moment that I wanted to share with anyone who's listening, because it's okay for us to need a timeout and for us to be overwhelmed. And my kids were safe. There's nothing in that environment that's harmful for them. I took 2 minutes, did a couple deep breaths sitting on my bed, opened the door. Declan and Ella were both sitting there at the door as framed, staring at me like, hello, mommy. Are you better now? And I was like, yes, I'm okay. Let's go. And then we had a good rest of the day. But that was my moment of mommy having to put herself in timeout because I was having big feelings, managing the big feelings.
I love that.
That is awesome. I love it.
So who wants to go next?
My Momtroversial moment happened yesterday. We had Reagan's 4-year-old well check, because while we do no vaccines, I don't feel like some uneducated person reporting me for not taking care of my kids. So we always go to our well checks. And we got there, and apparently at the 4-year-old checkup, I don't know because I've never had a 4-year-old, but they check for lead poisoning, and they do that through a blood draw. So we went into that with no preparation whatsoever because I had no idea it was happening, except like the 5 minutes while she was gathering her like everything she needed, the nurse. And I'm explaining to Reagan, like, this is going to hurt a little bit, but then it's going to be over, thinking my reference point is Kennedy had her blood drawn a year ago or so, and like literally stared it down while it was happening, didn't make a sound. Okay. So I'm like, it's okay.
It's so KK.
It is
It's
so
so
KK.
It is so
It is so KK. So I'm like, it'll be fine. I'll hold her tight. She might go ow, but it'll be fine. No, this girl with strength that I don't know where it came from jerked her arm out so fast that the poor nurse had to poke her twice she had to go to her other arm because like I wasn't prepared for Reagan to like react so aggressively, I guess, which is on me. Like she's getting something poked into her arm. I should have known. But yeah, so then
She
we
went maybe
had
hold on you.
to, yeah, she did. So then we had to move to the other arm. It was like a laugh and cry moment because like the things she was saying were kind of funny, but it was like so sad that she was screaming and crying. Why are they doing this? Mommy, I never want to do this again. Why is the doctor hurting me, Mommy? Because,
Ooh.
this girl has never, since she was like 2 months old, had a shot. So she has no basis for this. Nothing.
Yeah.
And it was just a rough morning. And we went and got her lunch that she wanted at Popeyes. And then we went and got her ice cream that she wanted. And we just did whatever she wanted for the whole rest of the day. We called almost every family member to tell them about it because Reagan needed them to know about her trauma. And
Of course.
yeah, it was just it was just the whole thing. And if you don't know that that's what they check for at the 4-year-old appointment, now you do. Prepare your kid, because I didn't know and I did not, and it did not go well for me.
I remember them wanting to do that at 1 and I declined it because I was
At
like, I live in a
1?
brand new house. Yeah, I remember them wanting to do it. I think it was either 1 or 18 months with both my kids, and I said, "No, I live in a brand new house.
Yeah.
My husband doesn't work somewhere that thinks that I'm not concerned."
I would have said
I
no
didn't know they
except
did
for
a gap
Korea.
for.
I didn't trust Korea and the towers that we lived in,
So
that kind of
valid.
thing. So I did
So
think about
valid.
saying no because of that. I knew for a fact that none of the houses we had lived in. Then I was like, oh, I don't know about Korea.
That's so valid, though.
Yeah.
Korea. Freaking Korea.
Freaking
Yeah.
Korea.
Ugh.
Tori, what's your moment?
I'm gonna do an older moment that I know I've mentioned to you guys, but I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast. And it kind of goes into what we were talking about today, like how, you can't control what happens outside of your scope, like when your kids are with someone else. But you can control how you handle it. And especially the more time you have with your kids, I think the more you have to like process stuff like this. Well, and this is not to get political. This is going to sound like I'm getting political, but I am not talking politics because I don't like to do that. I hate politics. But Hannah comes home and she's like, Mom, did you know that the president can't even string 2 words together? Isn't that weird? That was what she said to me. And I was like, oh, okay. And I asked her where she heard it from, and she told me, and I said, well, what do you think about that? She's like, I don't know. I just thought it was so crazy that he's the president and he can't say 2 words. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I was like, well, sweetie, that's not true. He can say 2 words. And she's like, well, why would so-and-so say that? And I'm like, well, they were just saying something that they heard their mommy or daddy say and that they did not understand in full context. And, some people don't like our president. And she's like, why? I was like, it's just really this nuanced, crazy conversation that we can talk about when you're older. Because for one, I'm not going to discuss politics with my 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And so if any child that's below like middle school that has any semblance of an opinion on politics, like, no, you have no business. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're only parroting what other people are saying. Now, I still love this person very dearly, and I've never told them about that this happened. I am friends with all people, all walks of life, all political parties, whatever. You do you. But I just thought that was so funny how that transitioned from the mom or dad and then the daughter and then now to my daughter. But Hannah took it so literally that it was actually more comical than anything.
I have
She
so
couldn't
many
believe it.
comments, and I'm exercising so much self-control.
I'm so proud of you. The leader of America can't say 2 words, and Hannah's just shooketh. She's like, what? How is this happening? But yeah, that's my very old Momtroversial moment.
Oh, I love it.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on the Wild Ride Motherhood Week in and Week Out. If you guys could take a second and like, rate, and review our podcast, as well as any other podcast that you guys listen to, it's one of the best things you could do to just show some love. If you want to hear any topics discussed, or even if you want to be featured and come have a discussion with us, follow us, DM us at Momtroversial Podcast on Instagram, and we would love to have those conversations with you and for you. And until next time, keep it Momtroversial. Bye.
Bye.